Hey everybody, thanks as always for stopping by. So since October 7th, I've really made a concentrated effort not just to understand the Israel-Palestine conflict overall, that's always sort of been one of my passions actually, but I really want to focus on understanding the Muslim world a lot more. And so today, I want to talk about this book. Hey everybody, so today we're talking about the idea of the Muslim world. I don't know how to pronounce the author's name. I think it's Cemil or Cemil Aydin. And it's subtitled A Global Intellectual History. I think that subtitle could have been better chosen. It's not the only reason why I gave this 4 stars, but it did get 4 stars and I would stand by it. It was a very good book, but just to say something about the subtitle here, they could have done something a little more specific with that, the author and the publisher. But it really was a great book. So as I mentioned, I think I've said this in many videos recently, it's been the Palestinian issue in particular why I have devoted and invested so much time into understanding the Muslim perspective. But I would say, especially in the post 9/11 era, I think it's really incumbent upon us Westerners to reach out and try to understand not just the Muslim world, but simultaneously understanding the Muslim world will give us an insight into some of our own unobjective perspective. Opening your mind to the sort of the other side of the argument and the dehumanized aspect of Pan-Arabism and Islam, the more you understand that world, the more you'll understand your own world and some of the assumptions that don't get examined traditionally. And we really need that in the West because the Western perspective on foreign policy is simply not objective. It's about as unobjective as it gets, actually. I can hold that view and still condemn lots of the things that we see that have been sort of characterized of the Muslim world, although that is, again, part of the Western perspective too. There are things in that part of the world that I can't defend. There are certain basic assumptions or cultural things that I can never get on board with, no matter how much we couch that in just, diversity or inclusiveness or cultural tolerance and things like that. Yeah, there are some objectively screwed up things. I mean, speaking as an atheist, I think we can compartmentalize some of our intellectual differences with Islam, say, and the Islamic world as such. And this was really no better book to talk about in that context. It kind of frames the book against the backdrop of Barack Obama's Cairo speech back in 2009. That was such an important speech. It signaled to the Muslim world, or the Arab world, a new guy is in town, a new mentality towards their interests and their perspective was on the stage now. And I think that speech did do a lot of good things in making America a little more relatable, seen more as an olive branch being extended to them. But again, it sort of engaged that part of the world on Western terms, that there is some essential Islamic entity that we are dealing with. And he really targets that idea that the Western world has very much seen itself as opposed to Islam in itself, or seen Islam as a real big aggressor on the world stage. And what it does is it still feeds into the Western mindset that there's a world to be engaged out there, and there just isn't a Muslim entity out there, en soi, in itself, just self-existing, as if it's, you could almost divorce it from the realities on the ground, and there it is, just sort of pie in the sky. There it is, just sort of existing all on its own as this separate Platonic entity. The author really exposes that for the fiction that it is. It's not to say that there aren't certain things that unite Muslims. I mean, if you take a statistical view of all religions, for example, as it concerns particular social issues like abortion, say, or just female reproductive rights overall, or the role of women in an economy, or gender roles and things like that, statistically, you're going to get some orthodoxies that you can just, in their majority, you can say this is the trend. Yeah, you can do that with any sort of statistical majority. You can do that with any proclivity that humans tend to have in their tribalist makeup. But he looks at the history of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, as much as you can do so inside of how many pages here, like 300 pages. What he says is there are even voices within that group that say we should be more like this. We should be more of a predictable Muslim entity so that we'd be more of a force to reckon with. I'm just going to read you a little quote here. This was said by the Pakistani economist and Islamic scholar too, Khurshid Ahmad, written in 1967. He said, "Muslims today constitute 1/5 of the human race. And despite all this, Muslims have no effective voice in the world affairs. They have become passive camp followers of others. Imperialist powers of the East and the West are active in their lands. Their basic problems remain unattended. What to say of their solutions? Palestine bleeds. Kashmiris groan. Turkish Cypriots cry. Eritrean Muslims are being crushed. Nigerians are being subjected to sabotage from within. Somalians grumble and protest. But all these voices of agony and anguish fall on deaf ears. Problems are becoming more and more aggravated. Situation is worsening, and we, the 650 million Muslims, stand bewildered and aghast, helpless spectators of our own ruin." Bearing in mind this was written in 1967, right? This is a paradox, and we must wriggle ourselves out of this unhappy state of affairs. I believe this writer echoes a sentiment deeply felt throughout the Middle East that, by God, if only we could unite behind a common creed, politics, or vision for our people going forward, in stark contrast to the undeniable reality that Islam is decidedly fractionated, diverse, and intersectional. Despite ostensibly being this, redoubtable force of nature going damn near 2 billion adherents strong. We can look at the Muslim world and we can say they feel this way about atheists, or they feel this way about abortion, or they feel this way about adultery, or they feel this way about LGBTQ rights. You can look at these salient markers and think that you're referring to something out there. You go into Palestine, there's a very robust LGBTQ movement. There's a very robust literati that criticizes Islam, and you'll see a full range of perspectives from the ultra-Orthodox to, those who are as secular as it gets, or those who are vaguely religious, like New Agers here in the West, who have some sort of spiritual identity with Islam, and that's about it, as far as the rigid doctrines or how closely you have to adhere to Ramadan or praying 5 times a day. There's a vast range of religiosity and affiliation within the Muslim world, just as it exists everywhere else in the world. And I've really come to appreciate this as I try to understand that part of the world more and challenge the Western perspective. And it happens on a day-to-day basis, and it happens in very subtle ways, that you just associate Islam with jihad, or that you associate it with extreme Sharia precepts, or you associate it with intolerance, or you associate it with anti-intellectualism. I mean, even that word, a Philistinism, referring to Palestinians and their sort of knuckle-dragging ways. I mean, this is how the West portrays them. This is how we portray the Muslim world generally, Arabs generally, and especially Palestinians. They're just these backwards people who want atheists killed, and they want the LGBT gone, and they want women to be veiled. That's not the Muslim world. It's not even remotely the Muslim world. And we need to stop it. So, again, I want to say this with something of an asterisk. Islam as an idea, just like Christianity, just like Judaism, just like any other religion, has certain tenets baked into it that I can't deny are statistically there. And you have to acknowledge that, people are going to interpret certain scriptures one way most of the time. And so as an idea, as a concept, certainly speaking as an atheist, I can attack that. Just as atheists can be attacked for their proclivities towards neo-Darwinism or something along those lines, or logical positivism. There's certain assumptions that most atheists will have, but it doesn't represent all atheists. It's just a statistical blip. But, as humans, we look at things in very low resolution ways. And when we talk about Christianity or Judaism or Jainism or whatever, Buddhism, there are certain things that we can kind of anticipate and critique as a concept. But don't go thinking that every person who identifies with that ideology is going to accept it whole cloth and wouldn't have some nuance. That's what this book talks about, but more in the political sphere, and I really enjoyed it. I think it should be necessary reading, this or something like it, for Western thinkers like myself. I think it's really important that we do that. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you've read this or if you've read books that sort of challenge that Orientalist, essentialist view of Islam. I'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.